And it's a good one.
Okay.
We like strikes.
Okay.
We like strikes.
Mm-hmm.
Workers Unite, absolutely. Anna Ringwald. Workers Unite. Wait, what's going on there with our little chat guy? Oh, that's good. No, we're good. Worker strikes. So up in 2022, I think anyone who watches this show would not be surprised, or listens to this podcast would not be surprised by this number at all, and by these statistics. But this is still pretty eye-opening stuff, and it's always good to hear and to reinforce and give us ammunition to go at people who are saying that the worker movement is XYZ, not growing, etc. But literally record strikes in 2022. Strikes up 52%, according to a Popular Resistance Story labor action tracker here. The ILR school database documents U.S. work stoppages. They inform journalists and policymakers, activists, scholars, and the public about labor activism and unrest. Awesome. So they break down by field and by sector where these work stoppages are happening. And it's fascinating to see. I'm not going to leave this up for long and let you guys geek out on this. I'll put the link in the description.
Look at this graph.
Look at this photograph. Yeah, now you're making me sing Nickelback. That's terrible.
Look at this graph.
424 total work stoppages, 417 strikes, and 7 lockouts, up from 279, which is a 52% increase, involving 224,000 workers, up from 140,000, which was a 60% increase. You had over 4 million, almost 4.5 million strike days measured during the duration of a strike, multiplied by the approximate number of workers. Now, that was partially thrown off by the Warrior Met coal miners strike, of course, because that was throughout all of 2022. But top industries by numbers of workers: educational services, healthcare, social assistance, manufacturing, there's your miners, retail, trade, and information.
Yeah.
So what is this database? It's a comprehensive database of work stoppages, the Cornell ILR Labor Action Tracker. Project began in 2021 and is led by Johnny Callis, who's a PhD this year, graduating this year. So this is his doctoral thesis and his doctoral project, to provide a fuller picture of worker activity to inform policymakers, the public, and others about workplace conflict. The data collection is unique to the ILR school, he said. Due to funding cuts by the Reagan administration in the 80s, the BLS excludes work stoppages of fewer than 1,000 workers from its database. But it's imperative to have reliable data on strike activity by union and non-union workers and stoppages of all sizes. Keep journalists, policymakers, activists, and scholars informed about labor activism and unrest across the United States. In addition to documenting whether a strike occurred, our tracker and annual reports provide detailed information on a number of variables pertaining to each action, such as industry, size, duration, and worker demands. That's really important stuff.
Strike Watch Action Alert.
I love it, right? So they have a couple of these professors which said that the Labor Action Tracker fills a vital gap in data on work stoppages in America that will be invaluable for research in this area. This is important information for policymakers. It's also important information for strike breakers. The growth in strikes this year is noteworthy, particularly in schools and higher education institutions. We can talk a little bit about that. Our friend Samantha over at the TUGSA, that's the Temple University Grad Students Association, had sent me. They did another protest and they had some bad weather, so the protest wasn't quite as well attended as the last one, but still really well attended, although the administration did cut their health care in retaliation. So Callis authored the report with Catherine Ritchie, so she's also still enrolled, and Associate Professor Eli Friedman. So this is, again, a little bit of a breakdown what were the reasons and the demands. Most of them, of course, were overpay. 234 of the work stoppages were overpay, but over 100 of them were over health and safety. 77 were over health care. This is fascinating stuff. And this list is not exhaustive, and a single work stoppage may have multiple demands, of course. But see that you put Nickelback in Angel's head now. Additional 2022 report findings include, and this one I thought was also really important to include, workers in the accommodation and food services industry organized more work stoppages in 2022 than any other industry, accounting for over a third of all events. However, these stoppages involved about 7,000 workers and only 3% of the total workers engaged in work stoppages because they have smaller staffs. The majority, 131 of work stoppages in the accommodation and food services industry were led by Starbucks workers organizing within the Starbucks Workers United campaign or by fast food workers organizing within the Fight for 15 campaign. Most workers involved in work stoppages also came from the educational services industry, and we covered a couple of those teacher strikes and grad student strikes, including 48,000 grad students and postdoctoral workers at University of California System, which I remember we covered. Number also reflects continued activism by K through 12 educators and higher education workers. Non-union workers organized a higher proportion of strikes in 2022. However, these strikes, of course, were smaller than work stoppages by unionized workers, mostly because they don't have the protection of a union. And many work stoppages in 2022, almost half, lasted 1 day or less, and 2/3 lasted fewer than 5 days. Now, a bunch of those we also covered. Those were planned 3-day stoppages, planned 2-day work stoppages to prove to the bosses, we can do this to you. And this is what it means when we don't work.
Yep.
Also important. But also to keep the lights on and keep them employed and working and having jobs and the company in business. The number of work stoppages and workers involved is less than the most recent comprehensive BLS data from the 1970s, which is also interesting. Also, the number of workers engaged in work stoppages in the past 2 years falls behind the recent organizing upticks documented by the government in 2018 and 2019. Also interesting. According to this report, more research would help make historical comparisons that account for the challenges facing striking workers in the labor movement. Project's methodology is documented in this article. Strike data are generated from existing work stoppage databases, news articles, social media posts, and other public sources, and then verified by the Cornell ILR Labor Action Research Team. This is funded by the ILR School, and they can be followed on Twitter at ILR Labor Action, and I encourage everyone to do that. This is good stuff. Here's the bottom line. 424 work stoppages, of which 417 were strikes. 224,000 workers involved. That sacrificed over 4 million strike days of hours that the bosses could have stolen from their labor, but that the laborers have held out on the bosses to show them we have demands and you guys are not meeting them. Solidarity with workers, always.